Bro's
Yeah, the way
about to cook.
yeah. I wanted to distinguish it on the basis of the antecedent will and the basis of the consequent will.
I
But
was just distinguishing.
yeah, I'm already distinguishing. No, because
Yeah,
I literally think that a lot of the issue, this especially comes down with what's his name, Father Most. Especially comes to Father
Oh
Most
yeah.
is they um misinterpret. Well, they confuse antecedent will and consequent will with an antecedent reprobation and
yeah.
consequent reprobation. You ever notice that?
Hmm.
Yeah, because I'll as
Not
I go through
not
as I
that,
go through,
but just a
I'll
percent.
explain. Yeah, I'll explain the equivocation. This is why a lot of people thought that I was misreading Marine Sola, actually, um,
Hmm. Hmm.
because Marine
A
Sola
lot of
says
people, interesting.
well, like one person. I
Yeah,
don't know why I said a lot of people, like one and a half people. Okay,
yeah. One
but
and one and a half. Yeah.
yeah, one and a half people.
Uh
Okay,
oh. Uh oh.
okay, the predestination rabbit hole is almost as deep as the Palamite one. No, because we actually know what we believe. Suarism never,
Do
Banyanism
you think we're gonna
forever.
get to address? Do you think we're gonna get to address the accusation of Eastern Fathers being Molinists?
Maybe, but it wouldn't matter because they still condemn Catholic answers.
Yeah, because I saw an Eastern Orthodox saying that Saint John Damascene was a Molinist.
So he's admitting that Saint John Damascene believed in a Catholic position.
Real, real. Yeah, they still think
You
that
just have to you
Molinists
no
believe.
you just have to be a king and reformulate every problem as a solution. Like, Saint John of Damascus was a Molinist. Like, oh, Saint John of
Yeah,
Damascus was a Catholic because
yeah,
Melina was a
yeah,
Catholic. I mean, Melina
yeah,
Melina professed obedience to the Roman Pontiff, so Saint John of
yeah.
Damascus, base Saint John of Damascus, I guess.
Although I would distinguish that proposition, but go on.
Yeah, funny. Okay, I was pre-moved to donate to Scholastic Answers. All of
So
you
true.
better be physically pre-moved. All
Yeah,
of you better be physically pre-moved to send those super chats. You know, Hassan's about to be
yeah,
so
real.
triggered. He's so triggered because how's it going, Hassan?
Oh,
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Astro. Hello, Christian.
Alaikum salam.
hello. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hassan.
Nice. Okay.
Mashallah. Mashallah.
Mashallah.
I really enjoyed over the last few days the predestination videos have been, and justification stuff because of that, have been getting passed around a lot more. And like lots of people who had no idea about it are, because of all the magisterial stuff that you've presented, they've been way more willing to change their views. So
Okay, let's go.
there's a lot of people who
Let's
are
go.
realizing that the popular consciousness about this has been wrong. So I'm really happy about that.
Thank you. Thank you. It's honestly I love when that happens because a lot of people actually because I complained about the people in my comments who
Hmm.
were like acting like fools and spurging out in my comments. But there were actually a lot of people who were like, yeah, before I kind of didn't really, have an idea about this. I thought or like better yet, a lot of people were actually commenting like, hey, I actually I had some prejudices against Reformed theology, and this clarified some points concerning like what Calvinists actually believe, which is very helpful when it comes to the type of damage that the average sort of catechumenal line can do to the sort of viewpoint of the average Reformed individual of the Catholic Church. Because if we stop getting random catechumens saying stupid things about Reformed theology to all
Yeah.
these Reformed individuals, then they're much more disposed to the church. Because have you noticed a sort of shift in the narrative amongst a lot of um, Reformed types to where they went from like debunking Catholicism to debunking pop apologetics. You ever notice that shift happened?
Hmm.
It's because
Yeah.
Yeah.
we got a lot of people to stop saying dumb things, and it's
Hmm.
really really amazing. So
Hmm.
this is exactly why we use terms like double predestination. By the way, it's exactly why.
The issue is that like a lot of people when they watch the videos, even though you've stated everything clearly, because so many individual propositions get clearly stated and they're completely new to some people, they miss a bunch of them. So I was kind of going through some of the popular feedback in Telegram groups and on Discord places and stuff like that over the recent video and the St. Fulgentius one, right? And some people were very confused because they thought that when we use the phrase double predestination, it refers to the antecedent negative reprobation and positive predestination to the first grace and to glory. And they didn't understand that that wouldn't, the first wouldn't come under predestination because it's a mere permission, right? And the predestination is actually
it would reduce to it merely.
Yeah, right. The predestination, and you did mention this a couple of times in the video, but when we say double predestination, the other predestination, other than the predestination to grace and glory, is the predestination of the imposition of punishment, right? Not the permission of damnation or the permission of the sins which demerit and cause somebody's damnation, but the very predestination of hellfire against this person, against the sense punishment against this person.
Yeah, usually, magisterially, almost actually completely exclusive. Because to be clear, there's no magisterial teaching on antecedent negative reprobation. People are free to. I think they should hold to it, but they're free to not hold to it, even though it's the majority opinion amongst the schools, even amongst most Jesuits. So yeah, but there's clear magisterial teaching on consequent positive reprobation. If people listening, if you don't know these terms, I'm about to go through kind of like an explanation of everything. And Hassan can chastise me whenever I'm not explaining things clearly enough. And Astro can add in a sprinkle of autism as we go.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, and also another thing that a lot of people were confused by is the frequent use of language of foreknowledge in texts from the magisterium about election. Which is odd. I mean, I explained it in the beginning of this video, but the confusion's kind of odd because like every single scholastic, no matter what school, includes foreknowledge in the definition of predestination. So it's an act that includes both the will and the intellect. So it's the foreknowledge in preparation of future gifts. So everybody includes foreknowledge under their definition of predestination. It's really just the thesis that's being presented against us says that the cause of predestination is foreknowledge. If the effect of it is foreknowledge, then it doesn't make sense that it's its cause, or at least if it's included in its definition, it doesn't make sense that it's the cause. So like that very inclusion actually disproves the principle that it's trying to set forward. But anyways, I will get back to my sheet of paper. There we go. Yeah, you guys are in the background, but they can still hear you. Okay. So when we start about name the document predestination. We start about predestination. We first need to understand the distinction between the antecedent and the consequent will. So basically, the antecedent will is how we explain texts like God wills all men to be saved. Because there are certain texts in sacred scripture that talk about God wills, all men to be saved. God wills no man to perish. Blah 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 blah. We have a lot of texts like this that describe things that don't efficaciously come to be in reality. Then we have other texts that talk about God's will efficaciously coming to be in every circumstance. So we need to clearly distinguish between two senses of the term will. So antecedent and then consequent. So to clarify, this is a distinction on the part of the object, so on the part of the thing's will. There's a distinction that exists formally in our intellects. This isn't as if God had in himself, multiple wills or anything like that. So when it comes to antecedent will is referring to God's general, you call it God's general will. And then when it comes to consequent, we can call this God's special will. So with the antecedent will, antecedently, this is generally for the consideration of all circumstances, blah, 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 blah. With these things, these are general laws. And this doesn't always come to pass. Consequently, this is God's considering something in particular in its specific nature and its circumstances, blah, 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 blah. This is God's consequent will, and it always comes to pass. And really, the distinction between the universal ends of something and the particular ends of something. So when it comes to God's antecedent will does not always come to pass. It's not always come to pass. And we can also, from this, say that there is a certain, dang it, this sucks. It is a certain general promotion, or we can also call this an impedible promotion. Certain general promotion or impedible promotion of just working things in general management, if you may. So when it comes to the consequent will or God's special will of things in their particular natures, this does always come to pass. And this refers to we think about special promotions. And no, these are antecedent will is non-impedible promotions. And these refer to impedible. From it flows impedible promotions. So with the antecedent will, remember, the important thing to remember is antecedent will does not always come to pass since it is non-impedible. Oh, sorry, I mixed it up again. Antecedent will is impedible. It can be impeded. Consequent will is non-impedible. Cannot be impeded. Sorry, mixed it up. Antecedent will does not always come to pass since it is non-impedible. Impedible. Gosh. See, we get these terms mixed up too. Consequent will always comes to pass since it is impedible. Why does it always keep changing to impeccable? Well, it's also impeccable. So consequent will always comes to pass since it's impedible. Okay. So in the natural order, this is kind of easy to think of because when we're thinking in the natural order, let me make this.
Hold on. Don't you mean unimpedible? Because it always comes to pass.
I mixed it up for a fourth time. Okay, non-impedible. Very good. Thank you, Hassan. Hassan is saving everybody right now. I almost just confused literally everyone. I'm pretty sure I already confused literally everybody. It's okay. On the when I make a clip of this, I'll just clip out all of the times in which I said wrong words. Okay. How do I make this? I want to format this to pageless. There we go. Okay. So in the natural order, let's think about this in the natural order. In the natural order, this is kind of easy to think about. Because in the natural order, there are a lot of, just the antecedent will, just general ways of God working within creation. And, general ways of God working. And with these general ways of God working, in things particular ends, they can fail. I mean, when you look at I'm going to think about like the end of a lamb. The end of a lamb, it's living. Living is good for it. But when it gets killed by the wolf, it fails to keep its particular end. Or you can think about the end of life. Life is always living beings is always the best example. Think about the end of a tree to grow and it gets cut down. The things fail to keep their particular end, but okay, so particular end is impeded, but it keeps its general end. because it's good for the lamb to be eaten by the wolf because the wolf needs to eat. So in the general order of things, things still keep, but maybe not the particular ends. So the antecedent will, we can also call this maybe like an extraordinary, if you may. No, not exactly the most accurate, but extraordinary. The antecedent will, we can think about it with the particular ways of God working. And then with this, the particular end is achieved. What's important is it is achieved. Did I spell achieved wrong? Gosh, I always spell words wrong. It's about to be game over. Is the E before the I? No, the I is before the E. Okay, good. Wow. Impressive. Okay, the particular ways of God working, the particular end is achieved in an extraordinary way. Okay, just reminder, extraordinary way. That's very important. And then also, and this is very important, after the manner of the agent. After the manner of the agent. So with the antecedent will bringing about these particular ends, it doesn't somehow, when it goes from consequent will to antecedent will, corrupt the nature of the thing. So if it's a rock and it falls, it naturally falls. If it's a balloon and it rises, it naturally rises. If it's an animal and it does whatever, it does it in accordance with its nature. If it's man who, wills something, it wills in accordance with his free will. When God moves in things, he moves after the manner of the agent. It's very, very important. Yeah. Yeah, dyslexic answers. Critical Tomes, great video on justification. Thank you. Okay, so this is in the natural order. Oh man, I am terrible. Second one's supposed to be consequent will. Man, I am so sorry, guys. I'm so sorry. I hope I'm not confusing you guys. Okay, so now the fun part is we can also look at this in the supernatural order. Okay, this is where things get fun, because this is where we can start talking about predestination and stuff. Okay, who is DMing me right now on Discord? Oh, okay. Thank you, Hassan, for that. Okay, antecedent will. Okay, so the antecedent will in the supernatural order, if you think about it, what's the sort of thing that's important in the supernatural order? It's grace. Grace is what's important. Good job, guys. It's grace. Okay, so the antecedent will, this is going to be certain general order, the sort of general order of providence when it comes to grace, right? Okay, right. So with the antecedent will, if you have a premotion, which we would generally call like a vocation or a call of the Spirit, if you may, it's going to be something, remember we looked above, it's going to be something which is general, it's something which is impedible, and it has all these natures. This thing is going to be, what is it going to be, guys? It's going to be sufficient grace. I'm going to call it sufficient grace with a little asterisk next to it. Because technically, or better yet, let's call it a motion of sufficient grace. A motion of sufficient grace. Because Hassan and I have been talking about, and this is very important, and as I said, sufficient grace really refers to this entire providence, not necessarily all of those individual motions. It refers to the entire providence. But what most people are interested in is this motion of sufficient grace. This is something which, one, can be impeded. So people can resist this. It's also two, it's what's called agere. So it's a motion. It's a motion. Three, it virtually contains the it is important is that even when it fails to reach its end, it is ordered to the end. So just like with those animals that failed to keep their end, they're still ordered towards their end when they're killed and snuffed out. So what this leads to is sufficient grace virtually contains efficacious. That's important. Sufficient grace virtually contains efficacious. Sufficient grace virtually contains justification. So it's tending towards that, and it gets snuffed out by some sort of impediment. Certain motion, it's going, and it gets snuffed out. So what this leads to is, if we can think about it, let's think about a little test case real quick. So you have Adam in the garden in a state of pure nature, but this is the important part, but called by sufficient grace. If you think of a time, let's say Adam's in a state of pure nature, then he gets called by sufficient grace. God elevates pure nature to the supernatural order. If Adam were to have this sufficient grace, this motion of sufficient grace right here, if he were to have it, it would be ordered to the end. And it would, if not resisted, if not impeded up here, would terminate in that end, would terminate in conversion. So when we have in our world today, we obviously have sufficient grace. Everybody has sufficient grace. Everybody has these motions. So when they go and impede it by their evil, by their wickedness, which happens every single case, which is going to be important, happens every single case, they are held liable. Why are they held liable? Well, it was ordered to the end. All you had to do is not impede it. It's a motion which virtually contains efficacious grace. What's important is, in this case, the sufficient grace virtually contains efficacious grace. If the motion was not impeded and it went and terminates, this would be called ordinary efficacious grace. It's important. Ordinary efficacious grace. So, but you have this antecedent will of God, sufficient grace. But what happens? What happens, guys? Original sin, actual sin, rejection of this order. So people don't reach their particular ends. So this leads us now to the consequent will. It's consequent will. So the consequent will, this right here is where predestination happens, in the consequent will of God. It's very important. This is where predestination happens. Okay. It's consequent will of God. We can distinguish sort of various different motions. Because for Thomists, we are what are called infralapsarians. I can spell infralapsarians, but I can barely spell achieve. Okay, thank you. Infralapsarians. What does infralapsarian means? This means that predestination and reprobation, or actually, for ease of use, I'll just say election and reprobation. Election and reprobation suppose man is fallen. And this is against the error of the Scotists, who were supralapsarians. Oh, crap. I stopped sharing my screen. Dang. Let me put it back in. There you go. This is the error against the error of supralapsarians, Scotists, against the error of the Scotists. We don't want any Scotistic nonsense here, right, guys? Okay. But anyways, election and reprobation suppose man is fallen. So we can have two moments here. We can have where we can have actually consideration of individual demerit. Consideration of individual demerit. We can have a moment that, because remember, man has fallen, failed to keep his particular end, all this, and then we can have consequence. Okay. So consideration of individual demerit. We can have the time before that. We can have the time after that, which is split between antecedent and consequent. So before this, we have man has fallen. God has given sufficient grace to this individual, and this individual has rejected this sufficient grace. So now with the consequent will, what does a consequent will do? Because we already covered this above in the natural order. Consequent will infallibly carries out particular ends after there's this failure of the antecedent will. That's what the consequent will does. So these individuals who have fell, these individuals fallen, they're supposed to have fallen. Remember, they've fallen, they've rejected sufficient grace. So now God can choose by his consequent will to bring about this particular end. That's what he can choose. So, and it's kind of confusing because we use antecedent and consequent in two different ways here, either antecedent or consequent in consideration. Actually, I'll just change this to, just for ease of use, to before and after. There you go. Before and after. So he's supposing man has fallen, and now he can choose whether by his consequent will to give efficacious grace. Now, he either out of the sort of pure generosity of his grace, he can either give it, and in giving it, this is what we can refer to as positive antecedent predestination. Positive antecedent predestination, or rather, as I said before, I'll keep it, positive antecedent election. So what God is choosing is he's choosing by his consequent will to bring about a particular end. That's what positive means. Antecedent means before the consideration of merits, and then election just means to heaven. So that's identifying the type of end it is. Okay. On the other hand, he can choose to not give it. Choose to not give it. So him choosing to not give it is not any sort of positive carrying out of a particular end. Not at all. It's not him bringing about a certain effect and a certain promotion in somebody to push them towards hell. This isn't like we have an anti-grace or anything like that. So this right here is what we call negative antecedent reprobation. Negative antecedent reprobation. And this is said to reduce to the genus of predestination. Which is why when you look at St. Thomas, he's treating both of these within the question on predestination. Although properly speaking, it merely reduces to the genus. So, negative antecedent reprobation. He chooses not to give this extraordinary motion to carry out the particular end after it's already been rejected by sufficient grace. So that's always important. Always important to keep in mind. And basically, once you keep all this in mind, any single objection that you could have to predestination is already destroyed. Okay. So now you have the individual consideration of demerit / merit. Okay. So now he chooses not to give right here. Now God goes on after to consider the sort of fall into sin that happens, the fall into actual sin that happens. So after the consideration of demerit, he chooses to give what? Give punishment. So you have people give punishment. If you have people who have fallen into sin, they've fallen into sin, they've not been given this efficacious grace, fall into sin, reject sufficient grace, and now these persons are liable to punishment. The Reformed refer to this up here by the name Predestination. That's what they refer to as Predestination. And then with giving of punishment, they refer to it with something called, and I like to keep this in Latin, Predestinatio. So they refer to the previous as Predestination, the after as Predestinatio. This is after the consideration of demerit. They give punishment, and this is called positive consequent reprobation. Positive consequent reprobation. Positive because it's actually the application towards some end. Consequent because it's after the consideration of demerits. And reprobation because it's to punishment. And this is actually referred to explicitly, so this second point, referred to explicitly in magisterial texts. Explicitly in magisterial texts. So positive consequent reprobation. And this is, since it's positive, it's properly, not merely reductively, properly called predestination. And this, in particular, is actually what's called predestination to punishment in magisterial texts. Magisterial texts refer to this, and they call predestination to punishment. So when Queersy, I think that's what Queersy. Queersy refers to the one or the one predestination of God. I think it's to glory and to punishment. I know it's hilarious. Is somebody actually in one of my videos, I quoted this text in the video, and the guy replies in the comments and quotes Council of Kiersey, one predestination of God. The guy didn't realize that I quoted that exact text in the video, and he didn't realize the next clause that actually proves that positive consequent reprobation is called predestination by the magisterium. Ridiculous. Can't win. So, okay. So what's going on with now? A lot of people, everybody wants to know what's going on with predestination to hell. What's going on with the rejections of irresistible grace, and what's going on with there's other objections that they frequently bring forward in my comments. Predestination to hell, irresistible grace. The universal call. So what's going on with these three? Okay, with predestination to hell, the first one we're going to be treating. What's important is to look at the schema that we've given: positive antecedent election, negative antecedent reprobation, positive consequent reprobation. Okay, but predestination to hell is actually gets mentioned. It gets mentioned very particularly in the Catechism. Okay, let's actually. What is? I can't remember what the exact Catechism number is. Is it this? Is it 600? No, it's not 600.
Yeah, I think it's 600 where it says. Are you talking about the one that says God predestines no one to hell?
Yeah.
That's 600 or 606. One of them.
Okay. Actually, let me just open up the Jimmy Akin article. Thank you, Jimmy Akin, for the sourcing real quick. Okay. So let's look at what this text says. Oh, it's 1037. Okay. Let's look at what this text says. So it says, God predestines no one to hell for this, a willful turning. God predestines no one to go to hell. This, a willful turning away from God. A mortal sin is necessary and persistence into the end. So when it's referring to God predestines no one to hell, and says actually a willful turning from God, a mortal sin is necessary. What does this mean? What does this mean? Because we don't think that negative antecedent reprobation is ordered towards hell. We don't think that. Rather, this reprobation is something which is to sin. And it's to sin by the negative action of not giving, by the consequent will of God, efficacious grace. So, what is this? What is this saying? This is saying that the punishment or positive consequent reprobation, the punishment or the decree to punishment requires that it be after the consideration of demerit. That's all it's saying. That's all it's saying. So it's denying symmetry between the way in which positive antecedent election works and the way in which positive consequent reprobation works. That's all it's doing. So that's important with the predestination to hell. That's just the context of what it's talking about. Okay, now irresistible grace. Irresistible grace. This one's pretty easy, as we already talked about. Consequent will of God works in the manner of the objects moved upon. So the grace which is given to God, well, infallibly efficacious, meaning that it's going to achieve its end, does it after the manner of freedom. Does it after the manner of the human freedom. Okay, and then universal call. God calling all people, question mark, question mark, question mark. God calling all people. No, God doesn't call all people if he does this. Well, yes, he does. Because if you remember, universal call, we can go up here. And remember our distinction between the sufficient and efficacious grace. The motion of sufficient grace calls all people to God. There are various different motions in this order. These motions are impeded, and it's ordered towards the end of God himself. So God's calling all by his sufficient grace at all times. Okay. And then there was one last thing that I wanted to bring up. Actually, I think that's about it. Okay, so you didn't listen. Okay. I already explained this. I just explained this. Okay. So right here with the antecedent will, motion of sufficient grace can be impeded. It's a motion ordered to an end, and it only fails to reach its end when it is impeded. All you have to do is not resist. And sufficient grace virtually contains efficacious grace. And also, I don't like the formulation of sufficient grace merely giving a sort of proximate potency to act. I don't like that formulation at all. That's not the formulation I used here either. As I said, I'm a marine solo enjoyer, so I prefer to talk about motions of sufficient grace.
Yeah. I was reading actually. Can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was actually reading Father Marine Sola like 2 hours ago, and he speaks of sufficient grace as an imperfect agere, so an imperfect act, not pure potency, because it hasn't reached its own end yet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's basically like he uses the example of like if you had basically a bow and arrow and you shot it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So the arrow keeps going. You have a little arrow going down,
Yeah.
and then somebody like with insane Hulk strength just goes up and grabs it. If you just let the arrow like fly, I mean, it has virtually contained within itself. If it was just not impeded, it would reach its end.
Yeah.
But by the resistance of the will, we resist it.
Yep.
So yeah, resistance, all evil, all resistance, all impeding, all of it comes from us. All the good comes from God.
Yeah.
That's the main principle behind it. I don't mean this in an impious way, but do any of the saints discuss how it is, quote, fair for all of Adam's descendants to be born with original sin when it was Adam who sinned? Yes. A lot of them do actually. This is especially evident with throughout the works of Saint Augustine against the Pelagians, and what they basically say is that original sin is some sort of privation of the. This is actually using more language of Saint Thomas, but it's a privation of an undue order. So we think about what formally original sin is. So materially, original sin is concupiscence, but formally, original sin's privation of original justice. Now, original justice is basically a call that is above one's nature. It's a call that's above nature. Because original justice orders one's soul in the supernatural order. So your intellect, your mind, your soul, your will, and your intellect are submitted to God, and you're lower to your higher. And God under the aspect of his supernaturality, so as he is in himself, not merely under the aspect of nature, which would just be natural justice. So original justice is given to man as something which is elevating, as something which is over, not due to him. So the loss of this, formally speaking, is original sin. Okay, following. Okay, good. So since it's the loss of something, formally speaking, it's the loss of something, or the privation of something that isn't due, then there's no injustice. There's no unfairness. It would be like, for example, and this is a very frequent example. Let's say my grandfather. No, actually, let's say Hassan. Hassan's grandfather is like the what is it like? What's like a leader name in Arab countries? I can't remember. He's like the caliph. Hassan's grandfather is the caliph. He's the caliph of the former Ottoman Empire. And then his grandfather, let's say, lost the title because he, wasn't a good strategist or whatever. Hassan couldn't say like, "Oh, it's unfair that I'm not the caliph." Well, the caliph is something that's, gratuitous, something that's above what is naturally due to you. Or it'd be like some sort of honorary title which is given to nobility of some sort, and then somebody's ancestor does an evil deed that makes them lose the title. Their descendants couldn't say like, "Oh, this is unfair." Like, well, no, it's actually something that was gratuitous, so it could be taken away. Same thing with original justice. Yeah, same thing with original justice. And this is why the reason that we talk about the pain of loss is because there is the reality that this nature has been called to a supernatural end. This nature is within the supernatural order. So this nature, when it loses that end, is truly losing it. It's truly, there's a true punishment of the loss of the beatific vision which they were called to. But because there wasn't any sort of positive sin or anything like that, there's no pain of sense, and because they didn't have those motions of sufficient grace, then there isn't any sort of interior affliction because they don't sense the fact that they resisted something that was calling them, which is where the worm of conscience comes into the pains of hell. Okay, so I hope that is helpful. Hassan, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I think it would be. Remember when we were talking about how like the mere fact of being a human being during a redemptive dispensation would be able to be called a sufficient grace, like an external sufficient grace. Yeah, that's really important, because one of the questions that's been asked in the chat is, okay, so if somebody isn't at the use of reason, in what sense do we say that they have any sufficient graces? Because like they're not impedible by them. So exactly what are they? Because some sufficient graces are not like motions that occur within your will that you can cooperate with, or some like external stimulus of an internal response that you could cooperate with or resist. Some sufficient graces are things like you being born in certain circumstances, or just being conceived, period, which means that now it's possible for you to receive at least an extraordinary grace. Like it's really possible. Like the notion of sufficient grace doesn't actually necessarily contain a human action. I think that's something as like a product or a response. I think that's something that needs to be explained a bit more.
True. The reason for this has to actually do with okay. I really didn't want to have to explain extrinsic denomination. Should I?
I think you should, because every time this has come up with other people, I've realized that it's like necessary to go into it.
Okay. Yeah, let me clear out my board, bring it back up. Okay, share screen. Okay, let's wipe off the. I need like a like a whiteboard like Jay Dyer. That'd be pretty cool. Okay, so let us turn this back into pageless format. Okay, so basically, I explained this before, but remember, antecedent, broadly speaking, antecedent and consequent will. Consequent will in the antecedent will is always general providence. Okay. General providence, and consequent will is always special providence. Just remember that. And then this is distinct from the motions which pass from these. So general providence is distinct from the various different motions which are, flowing into them. Okay, because providence is something that exists fundamentally in God, whereas the motions, actually, Astro, this is your time to shine, Could you explain the difference between the formal act of God and then the promotions that are really distinct from the formal act of God? Is your time to shine? Oh no, is he not here? He was literally just talking to me about this. Okay, whatever. Yeah. General providence, and then you have from this general providence flows general motions, and from the special providence flows special motions. Okay, if you remember, if you're using your brain, antecedent will of God from this flows. If we may, and this is talking about the supernatural order. Um, general call, the general call of all men, or also called the desire for the salvation of all men, the general providence, and then there are um, the general motions, and the general motions are motions of sufficient grace. Okay, got that all in your brain? Okay, now with the consequent will, what flows from this is the particular call, and this is the efficacious desire for the salvation of the elect. And this is actually what we call predestination, or generally speaking, predestination. You can call it election, you can call it whatever you want. It's called equal predestination, election, blah, blah, blah. Okay. And from this flows not motions of sufficient grace, but motions of efficacious grace. Okay, motions of efficacious grace flows from the consequent will. Okay, so it's important to distinguish the motions right here from the call up here. Because the call basically just orders something to some end, and the motions in particular are something intrinsic. So so remember, the call equals extrinsic, and it's merely an ordering to some end, some general end on the part of the antecedent will, or a particular end on the part of the consequent will. So the call equals extrinsic, it's ordering to some end. And then when it comes to consequent will, this is just called predestination. And then the motion is very important. The motion is something intrinsic, and it is the some sort of agere towards end. Okay, so when we talk about this, it's important. The ordering to some end, the final cause of something or the end of something, is what's called an extrinsic cause. Whereas when it comes to the formal cause, which we include a certain motion under, it's an accident which adheres in subject. This is going to be extrinsic, or we can call it by way of extrinsic denomination. And then the motion is intrinsic, or by way of intrinsic denomination. Okay. So call extrinsic, motion intrinsic. Very important. Okay. So when it comes to those with reason, reason, theology, reason, those with reason, they have the extrinsic call, the extrinsic ordering to an end, extrinsic call, extrinsic ordering, extrinsic call, extrinsic ordering, blah, 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 blah. So they are in the supernatural order by way of extrinsic denomination. Extrinsic ordering, extrinsic call, extrinsic end. And this, as I keep harping on, is why there is the pain of loss. This is why there's the pain of loss, because they're truly ordered to this end, and if they don't acquire this end, then they've lost their end, supernatural end. So this, simply speaking, is present. Oh, crap. Those without reason. Yeah, I'm an idiot. Those without reason, extrinsic ordering, extrinsic call, extrinsic end. And therefore, if they don't achieve their end, they have the pain of loss. But since they know they don't have this intrinsic motion, I'm going to, okay, it's back. It's back. I think it's back. Are we back?
Are we live? Yeah.
Are we live? Are we live? You were silent.
Okay, sorry, I was just handling a few things.
Bro happens to leave right when I disappear for 2 minutes. Okay. So
Yeah,
where
sorry
was I,
about that.
guys? Where was I? Where was I?
You said since they know that they don't have
Okay, yeah.
because you cut off.
Basically, yeah. Okay. So remember, final cause is an extrinsic cause. The call itself is before or antecedent to the motion, and the motion flows from the call. So when there's some sort of, both of you guys can mute, by the way. When there's some sort of defect of subject, such as when there's a lack of rationality or whatever there may be, and it doesn't get received as an intrinsic form, there's still an extrinsic denomination because it's still called to that end. So if you remember all that, so the call, the motion, extrinsic, intrinsic. So when we have those without reason, they only have the extrinsic ordering, the extrinsic cause, extrinsic end, because it ends in extrinsic cause. So we only say that they are in the supernatural order by way of extrinsic denomination. And therefore, they only have the pain of loss because they didn't reach their end, but there's no intrinsic affliction, which I spelled affliction wrong. There's no intrinsic affliction. Gosh, I gotta mute that guy. There's no intrinsic affliction. Sorry, there's no intrinsic affliction because there wasn't this reflection on the fact that one did not achieve their end through the motions which were given to them, which are the motions of sufficient grace. So, and they don't have the pain of sense either. Okay, so those with reason have an intrinsic ordering, and then an intrinsic call, and then the motion that terminates in the end, basically. So there's motion that's going into them, motion, and they're impeding this by the choice of their own wills. And because it terminates in ordinary efficacious grace, they are held liable because it's their fault. They're the ones rejecting it, blah, 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 blah. So they don't only have the pain of loss, but they also have the affliction because they understand, their failure with the means they've been given, and they have the pain of sense. The pain of sense is the hellfire. So basically, when we're talking about sufficient grace, it's important to distinguish between the general call that is for the salvation of all men and all in place with his end. That's all we really mean by sufficient grace, this mere posse that we talk about. And then the motion that flows from this call, which is really distinct from the call itself. Which Astro, if he was paying attention 5 minutes ago, he could explain to you guys, but he wasn't paying attention. This is one of his favorite things to talk about, is the distinction between a promotion and the formal act on the part of God. But it's whatever.
I was paying attention to you. What do you mean?
Nope, I asked you like 10 minutes ago, bro, and you were silent.
Oh, maybe I was taking a nap. I'm sorry.
Bro was taking a nap.
Bro says he was taking a nap. He was probably eating juju kebab.
Yeah, he's eating kebab.
No, I actually did not
doing it in his sleep.
Okay. No, but 10 minutes ago you cut off.
So, you know what happened? The reason why I cut out, Augustine, we have like a power strip that connects all the things, and the power strip has a little switch on there. And I go out there, and Augustine is like turning on and off the switch, the power switch that connects to Wi-Fi. And that's why I kept coming back on. And I was like, okay, yeah, we're good. Then he would just turn it back off. Yeah, so it actually was him.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Augustine's a moment.
Wagner, couldn't someone use 1 Corinthians 7:14 to infer the faith of the parents can make the unbelieving child sanctified if they don't get baptized? Well, that's not at all the historic interpretation of the passage.
That would be such an absurd interpretation of the sense of the text. Sorry, man. Jenga, that's painful. You need to go and look at like Lapidae and Salmeron. Look at what St. Thomas says. Look at what St. John Chrysostom says as well. Like it's like cross traditional that there's like a united interpretation contrary to this, and the people who have other interpretations also have interpretations contrary to this one.
So, Unionist Initiative, he said Matthew 25, 34 through 35, plus mere corporate election, plus William Lane Craig, plus Salasio David on Twitter told me semi-Pelagianism isn't heresy, plus CCC 1037 says you're a Calvinist heretic. You know what's hilarious? Actually, Unionist Initiative, I got rid of the comment. So yeah, I get like emails like this, you know, that calling me, quote, very, very gay and AIDS riddled for my videos on predestination. But also I get like these comments where everybody's just spamming CCC 1037, say double predestination's heresy, CCC 1037. It's like, wow, it's almost like I've read that before.